What's going on? I'm Marcus and you're at the channel of the Debt Free Dad. In this video, I'm just going to call it Free Game Friday. I will tell you, initially I wasn't planning on putting out a video because I'm doing the live tomorrow at noon. First one, so make sure y'all check it out, noon Eastern time. Normally afterwards they'll be later than that, but because this is the first one, I was like, let me do a little early to make sure I'm doing it right. But I wasn't going to put out a video, but I actually got a few messages wanting to talk about this topic and wanting to give my perspective. So hey, for this Free Game Friday, I'm going to cover 3 topics. The first thing we're going to talk about is the eviction moratorium and what happened with that. Next thing we're going to talk about is marijuana stocks. Investing in them is now the right time. And the last thing we'll discuss and rap about is Bill Cosby. We'll rap a little bit about that. I do a little talking points and give my opinion on everything that's going on. So let's dive in. First of all, the eviction moratorium was actually supposed to end last month. Essentially what that is federal guidance that, hey, you can't kick people out of their homes until this COVID pandemic is over with. Now, what made it interesting, it was supposed to expire last month. The Supreme Court actually just recently heard the case, and they decided to allow the extension to the end of this month. So, if you're a landlord out there with a tenant who hasn't been paying their rent because of COVID, that's been extended all the way to the end of this month. So you can't collect those rents until August. That's bottom line, the rule and the decision. But essentially what happened is the guidance to extend it came out from the CDC. So all of these corporate landlords were challenging that guidance by the CDC by essentially saying that the Center for Disease Control didn't have the authority to put that type of guidance out. Well, unbeknownst to them, the Supreme Court heard it expeditiously. They didn't even write an opinion on it because it was something that needed to be resolved. They ultimately decided that the CDC does have the authority to put those measures in place because of a pandemic. So with that being said, like I said, that eviction moratorium is extended. People who lost their jobs or had a loss of income because of COVID, they don't have to pay. They can't be evicted. They can't be evicted until August. That's really where that one boils down to. The next one is just to kind of piggyback off the Supreme Court. We're going to talk a little bit about investing in marijuana stocks. Now, marijuana stocks are really probably going to be the thing of the future. They have a few ETFs out there. Actually, an ETF that I'm invested in is called YOLO. I really like the name, but it's just an ETF filled with various different cannabis companies. And a lot of people are investing in these stocks. Well, something interesting happened. One of the most conservative justices on the Supreme Court, old Clarence Thomas, actually came out publicly yesterday and said that the federal government should consider changing their legislation with regard to how it criminalizes marijuana. He expressly said that it was actually outdated and, kind of archaic. That's interesting, and I'll tell you why that's interesting. I think the general consensus is that federal legislation at some point is going to get moved to legalizing marijuana, not just decriminalizing it, but actually making it legal, which is 2 separate things. But it's interesting that Clarence Thomas had that particular talking point. One is because he's super conservative, and most of the times it's those people with those conservative values who are like, marijuana is a gateway drug, we can't legalize it. So for Clarence Thomas to come out and say that, one of the most conservative justices on the bench, that's actually a big deal. The other thing is, Clarence Thomas rarely speaks ever. He rarely writes an opinion. He actually, as far as the justice go, he writes the shortest amount of any legal opinion of any of the justices on the bench. He rarely chimes in unless there's a scathing dissent about something that he disagreed on. So for him to actually speak up and open his mouth and say something about this topic is really a big deal. The other thing is, hey, you have one of the most conservative justices on the bench putting out his opinion on how marijuana statutes should be changed to be decriminalized and potentially legal. Now, really conservatives hold the majority on the court. They have a few swing votes, but for the most part, conservatives can pass their policy positions or their interpretation of laws relatively easy. So it's going to be interesting to see what other conservative justices on the Supreme Court have that same view. If Thomas is jumping out there, I'm sure some of the other ones are jumping out there and probably feel the same way. So it's going to be interesting to see how this goes. I don't think Biden is going to be the person who's like, yeah, let's go ahead and get it done. He's kind of an old school dinosaur. I think his last position was, hey, he's on board with decriminalizing it, but not necessarily making it legal, whereas his vice president is on board with legalization of marijuana. So it's going to be interesting. But I think moving forward, if you aren't invested in marijuana stocks, those SNDL, those marijuana ETFs, now may be a good time to consider, because I just think that once we get to a point, which we eventually will, where it's federally decriminalized and legal just kind of across the board, I think it'll be a lot of room for growth on those stocks. All right, now let's talk about Healthcliff Huxtable. No, we're not going to talk about Healthcliff Huxtable. We're going to talk about Bill Cosby. Healthcliff Huxtable and Bill Cosby are clearly two different people. But first, let me just give you the background. This is going to be short and give you my opinion and explanation of what happened. So essentially, Bill Cosby had a civil case that happened years ago. The local district attorney, where the case was prosecuted, said, hey, we will not criminally prosecute you for these particular matters that you are testifying about in this civil trial. So based on that promise, Bill Cosby and his attorneys was like, okay, we're going to go ahead and testify in this civil case, and we're going to testify honestly. So Bill Cosby came forward, testified honestly to what went on with regard to that civil case. Fast forward, that local district attorney is no longer there. There's a new district attorney in place, and that new district attorney ultimately decides to prosecute Bill Cosby for a criminal activity, which he has the right to do. But where he made a fatal mistake, he used actual testimony from that civil trial. He introduced it into this criminal trial. So the reason that the court overturned it was because, I mean, think about it. From a common sense standpoint, Bill Cosby testified in that civil case that happened way many moons ago, but he testified in that civil case off of a promise and off of an exchange, off of an agreement that he could not be criminally prosecuted for those statements that he were making in that civil trial. New DA comes in, he not only prosecutes him based on new evidence, but he also pulls in all the evidence from that civil trial. So based on that, hey, that was really a violation, that was a no-go, and I mean, just from, you know, my legal standpoint, I actually agree with that position. I think that, I mean, the question is going to be, who do you think made a mistake? Was it the old prosecutor who handled the civil stuff and gave that promise and that deal to Bill Cosby that he wouldn't use that information to prosecute him criminally? Or is it the new prosecutor's fault who used new information but also pulled in that old information? Hey, in my opinion, I'm going to put most of this blame on the new prosecutor. He's the one who's dropped the ball. Anytime you're at a district attorney's office, there are a lot of memorandums and policies and things in place that the old boss did that you, as the new district attorney, have to come in, have to look, have to reevaluate, and have to see what you are obligated to uphold, or what policies and agreements you're obligated to uphold, or what agreements or policies you may be able to change and adjust. I don't think the new DA actually did his due diligence. Had he done his due diligence, he would have known that there was this prior agreement in place, and because of that prior agreement, all of that information that Bill Cosby testified to in that civil matter should have never came out. So with that being said, I don't want to get blasted or beat up by the Me Too movement. This is just really how I'll put it. I think justice is supposed to work for the alleged defendant, and justice is supposed to work for the alleged victim. The first half of this situation, it worked for the alleged victim. The second half of this situation, it worked for the alleged defendant. And those rules are in place just to make sure both sides are playing by the rules. So because the new prosecutor didn't do his due diligence, didn't play by the rules, hey, Bill Cosby get the walk. Now, with that being said, the new prosecutor couldn't always move forward with those charges again. He would just have to not include the testimony that occurred in that prior civil matter. Now, here's where I think it gets difficult, and this is just my opinion. You know, I've been doing this for some time now. I'm not going to say how long because I want to maintain my vibrant youth. But I think that it's a high possibility that these charges won't get filed again. I don't think that the new prosecutor who blew it when he first tried Bill Cosby, I would be shocked if he moved forward. I would really be shocked if he moved forward and charged Bill Cosby with these crimes again. I think the only reason is because when Bill Cosby testified in that first trial, and a lot of the facts and information that came out in that first trial were related to that civil testimony that by an agreement of the old district attorney should have never came out in the first place. Nobody should have ever known about it. So I think it would be really difficult to find a jury who doesn't have knowledge of some of the facts that came out in Cosby's original civil testimony. I mean, think about it. The jury pool is forever tainted. Some of the information that was published on the news and the media, on social media, about the Bill Cosby trial were facts that should have never came out because they were barred from coming out from an agreement based on Cosby's testimony in a civil case. So I think that just makes it hard to find a jury pool. If every time a trial happens, in some jurisdictions, or if it's federal or criminal, the judge asks the jury questions to determine if they're going to be fair and impartial. In other situations, the attorneys ask the questions if they're going to be fair and impartial. But I can think of questioning that I would ask juries about the facts of the first case. And if those jurors are aware of those facts, which should have never came in the first place, it's just going to make it tough for you to actually find a fair and impartial jury, because the national media and all the news outlets have essentially tainted the pool of jurors. Everybody know about the facts that came out from that civil testimony that should have never been in the first place. So that's kind of the background of what happened with the Cosby situation. That is kind of my thoughts on it. And I think the biggest thing that was actually kind of impressive. Hey, Cosby got a ride or die wife. As soon as Cosby got out, he went and hollered at Camille, and she was right there by his side. So it's going to be interesting, because I do expect to see an influx of civil litigation against Bill Cosby. I think just people going to sue, hey, all those victims, criminally, things kind of fell apart, but I think they may still seek some civil recourse to get into his pockets. But that's my thoughts and quick view on the Cosby situation, on the legalization of marijuana, and on the Supreme Court extending the eviction moratorium. That's everything I have on Free Game Friday. Make sure y'all check out the live tomorrow, noon Eastern Standard Time. It's just going to be my first one. We're just going to chop it up, do a little question and answer, just so I can get the hang of it, because it may be something that I throw in the bag, to give to y'all if y'all want it on a regular, consistent basis. Y'all take care. Have a good one. Be blessed. Love y'all. Peace.